Commander Sarah Chen stood at the viewing window of Galactic Station Delta 9, watching the swirling colors of the nearby nebula. Her reflection showed a tired face and rumpled dress uniform, evidence of the long journey from Earth. The massive space station hung like a silver spider in space, its 8 arms extending outward from the central hub. A soft chime from her communicator broke the silence. "Commander, your client is ready," announced the station's eye. Sarah took a deep breath, straightening her uniform. When she'd accepted this diplomatic assignment, many of her colleagues had called her crazy. Some had even suggested she was committing career suicide. After all, who would want to defend the last surviving member of a species that supposedly consumed entire star systems? The holding cell was located in the station's highest security section. As Sarah walked through multiple scanning fields, she noticed the nervous glances from the alien guards. Their tentacles twitched anxiously, and some even moved away as she passed. The fear was almost tangible. The cell itself was massive, taking up an entire section of the station. Sarah's first view of Sela took her breath away. The crystalline being floated in the center of the room, its translucent body refracting light in mesmerizing patterns. Sela was roughly the size of a small shuttle, with graceful spires extending outward like frozen lightning. "Hello, Sela," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm Commander Sarah Chen. I'll be representing you before the Galactic Council." Sela's crystal body pulsed with soft blue light. The universal translator processed the light patterns into words. "You are not afraid." Sarah smiled, stepping closer to the containment field. "No, I prefer to make my own judgments. The others, they will not listen. They see only what their ancestors taught them to see." Sheila's light patterns shifted to deeper blues and purples. 3,000 years of fear cannot be easily undone. Sarah pulled out her data pad and sat cross-legged on the floor, ignoring the startled gasps from the guards. "Then let's start with the facts. I've reviewed every reported attack attributed to your species. Something interesting stands out. There's no direct evidence, only interpretations of unusual stellar phenomena." Scylla's body brightened slightly. "You noticed this?" "I'm human," Sarah said with a slight shrug. "We're good at spotting patterns and missing evidence. Tell me your side of the story." Over the next hour, Sarah listened as Scylla described their species' true nature, the light patterns growing more complex as they spoke, creating miniature auroras within the cell. Sarah's data pad worked overtime recording everything. When she finally stood to leave, Sarah had filled dozens of pages with notes. More importantly, she had a theory forming. "I'll be back tomorrow, Scylla. I need to check some astronomical records." "Why do you help me?" Sheila's question stopped her at the door. "Your species is young. You have no part in this ancient conflict." Sarah turned back, her expression serious. "Because someone has to stand up for the truth. And sometimes it takes an outsider to see what everyone else has missed." As she walked back to her quarters, Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. She had 3 days until the council hearing began. 3 days to overturn 3,000 years of prejudice and fear. The case seemed impossible. But Sarah smiled as she began her research. Humans had a long history of doing the impossible, especially when everyone else said it couldn't be done. As she pulled up ancient star charts and began cross-referencing them with reported attacks, her smile grew wider. Tomorrow, she would show Scylla what she'd found. But tonight, she had work to do. The truth was hidden in the stars themselves. She just had to prove it. Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor of Scylla's cell, surrounded by holographic displays of ancient space phenomena. Her eyes were tired from hours of studying the records, but she couldn't stop now. Something about these patterns seemed familiar. "Show me that stellar event from the Carina sector again," she asked, rubbing her eyes. Scylla's crystalline form pulsed with soft light, projecting an image of what looked like a star-going supernova. But as Sarah watched carefully, she noticed something odd. "The light patterns. They're too organized," she murmured. Natural stellar events don't move like that. No, Sheila agreed, their lights shifting to create a similar pattern in miniature. They do not. Sarah leaned forward, excitement building. These aren't attacks at all. Are they? You were creating something. We called them songs. Sheila's form brightened. Each pattern tells a story, using stars as our canvas. Watch. The crystalline being began to glow more intensely, creating complex patterns of light that danced around the cell. Sarah gasped as she recognized the same movements she'd seen in the ancient records. It's art, she whispered. Your species wasn't destroying star systems. You were turning them into massive art displays. Yes. Sheila's lights pulsed with what seemed like relief. We never harmed the stars. We simply guided their natural energy into patterns, creating temporary displays that could be seen across entire sectors. Sarah quickly pulled up more historical records on her pad. That explains why there was never any real damage recorded. The stars always returned to normal after these supposed attacks. She stood up, pacing excitedly. But if your people were artists, why did everyone think you were destroyers? Sheila's lights dimmed slightly. Fear. When beings saw us working with stellar energies on such a massive scale, they assumed we must be weapons. They could not imagine that such power could be used simply to create beauty. Sarah nodded, understanding dawning. They saw what they expected to see. Threats instead of art. She began sorting through more records, now looking at them with new eyes. What had been labeled as attack formations were actually carefully choreographed movements. Weapon signatures were really the tools of artists working on a cosmic scale. Can you show me? She asked Sheila. Create something small, just here in the cell. Sheila's form shifted, creating a miniature light display that filled the cell. Stars seemed to dance around them. Nebulae swirled in impossible patterns, and waves of light told stories without words. Beautiful, Sarah breathed. Then she grinned. And perfect evidence for your defense. She started marking key points in the historical records, matching them with Sheila's current display. If we can show the council this, prove that these patterns match exactly. An alarm suddenly blared through the station. Sarah checked her pad and frowned. They've moved up your hearing. It's tomorrow morning now, not in 3 days. They fear the truth you might discover, Sheila observed, their lights pulsing rapidly. Sarah stood, determination on her face. Then we'll have to work faster. Keep showing me these patterns. I want to record everything. As she worked through the night, documenting each beautiful display, Sarah couldn't help but smile. She had come looking for evidence to defend Sheila, and instead had discovered something much more important. A lost art form that could change how the galaxy saw everything. Your people weren't monsters, she said softly. You were the galaxy's greatest artists, and tomorrow, everyone's going to learn the truth. Sheila's lights danced in response, creating one more pattern. A simple but beautiful display that Sarah somehow knew meant hope. Sarah's hands shook as she stared at the ancient data crystal. After 2 days of digging through historical archives, she had finally found it, proof of a carefully hidden genocide. The crystal contained military orders from 3,000 years ago, detailing the systematic hunting and destruction of Sheila's species. This can't be buried anymore, she whispered to herself, copying the files to her secure pad. The station's artificial lighting seemed to dim around her as she worked in the empty archive room. When she reached Sheila's cell an hour later, 3 council security officers blocked her path. Their uniform insignias marked them as representatives from the Centaurian Empire, one of the oldest council members. Commander Chen, the lead officer said, his scaled face expressionless. The prisoner is not accepting visitors at this time. Sarah straightened her back. I'm Sheila's legal representative. You can't deny me access. We can, and we are. The officer's hand rested on his weapon. For security reasons. Whose security? Sarah asked quietly. Sheila's, or the council's? The officer's scales darkened, a sign of anger in his species. "Choose your next words carefully, Commander." Sarah smiled, activating her pad's recording function. "I choose these words. I have evidence that 3,000 years ago, the Centaurian Empire led an alliance to destroy Xyla's species, not because they were dangerous, but because you feared what you didn't understand." The other officers shifted uncomfortably, but their leader didn't move. "That's a serious accusation, Commander. One that could damage your career, or worse." "The truth often does damage those who try to hide it," Sarah replied. She held up her pad. "This conversation is being broadcast live to my embassy. Anything happens to me, and the files go public." After a tense moment, they let her pass. Sarah's heart was pounding as she entered Xyla's cell, but her voice remained steady. "Xyla, I found something. Something that explains everything." She projected the files into the air between them. Xyla's crystalline form dimmed as they processed the information. "So many. Lost. Our songs silenced. Our art destroyed. Because they feared what they could not control." "I'm so sorry," Sarah said softly. "But we can use this. The Council can't ignore direct evidence of genocide." "They will try." Xyla's lights pulsed with deep red patterns. "Fear is a powerful force, Sarah Chen. It echoes through generations." "So does truth," Sarah countered. "And I'm not alone. Look." She showed Xyla her pad. Messages were pouring in from younger Council species, the Arcturians, the Vega Collective, even some progressive Centaurian colonies, all demanding a fair trial, all questioning the ancient narratives. "Your people had no weapons," Sarah continued. "No warships, just the ability to create beauty on a cosmic scale. They killed your species because they couldn't understand how anything so powerful could choose art over conquest." Xyla's form brightened slightly. "You understand. How? Your species is so young." "Maybe that's why," Sarah said. "We're young enough to still question everything. And we've learned from our own history that fear of the different, the unknown, can make people commit horrible acts." A warning alarm blared through the station. Sarah checked her pad and felt her blood run cold. "They're calling an emergency council session. They're going to try to rush your sentencing before I can present the evidence." Xyla's crystal surface rippled. "What can we do?" Sarah's mind raced through options. The council chamber would be packed with representatives from all species. The perfect audience, if she could just get there in time. "We're going to give them exactly what they fear," she said, a plan forming. "A demonstration of your true power. But first, we need to get you out of this cell." Xyla's lights pulsed with curiosity. "You would risk everything." "That's another human trait," Sarah said, already hacking into the cell's control systems. "When we believe in something, we fight for it, no matter the odds." The containment field began to flicker. It was time to show the Council, and the galaxy, the truth about art, fear, and justice. Red emergency lights flashed through Delta 9's corridors as Sarah and Xyla moved quickly through the station's maintenance tunnels. The crystalline being had shrunk themselves to roughly human size, their body casting rainbow reflections on the metal walls. "Security teams converging on Section 8, the station's AI announced over the speakers. All personnel, be advised. Dangerous prisoner escape in progress." Sarah checked her pad's map. "2 more junctions until we reach my ship." She smiled grimly. "Good thing I kept it ready for a quick departure." A laser blast scorched the wall beside them. Sarah spun around to see 3 security officers at the far end of the tunnel, weapons raised. "Xyla, remember what we discussed?" Sarah asked, backing up slowly. "Yes." Sheila's crystalline body began to pulse with intense light. "But I do not wish to harm them." "We won't," Sarah assured them. "Just dazzle them a bit." Xyla's form erupted in a brilliant display of light, creating patterns that seemed to bend and twist the very space around them. The security officers stumbled, their shots going wild as their depth perception was completely thrown off. Sarah grabbed a maintenance panel and pulled it open. This way. They dropped down into a lower level, Sarah's military training helping her land softly. Scylla simply floated down beside her, their light show fading. That was fun, Scylla admitted, their lights pulsing with what Sarah had learned was amusement. Humans call it playing to your strengths, Sarah said as they ran. You're not a weapon, but that doesn't mean you can't defend yourself. They reached another junction, but Sarah held up her hand. She could hear boots pounding on the metal floor ahead. They're blocking our path to the ship. Perhaps. Scylla's form brightened thoughtfully. Perhaps we could create another display. Sarah grinned. I have a better idea. Can you project your light show about 50 meters ahead? Make it look like we're running that way. Scylla understood immediately. Their light patterns split off, creating a convincing illusion of their escape attempt down the wrong corridor. The security teams took the bait, charging after the false images. Now, Sarah led them down the real escape route. Her ship, a small diplomatic vessel called the Phoenix, waited in one of the emergency docking bays. They were almost there when a voice called out, "Stop right there, Commander." The Centaurian security chief stood blocking their path, flanked by 6 officers. All had their weapons trained on Sarah and Scylla. "You're throwing away your career," the chief said. "And for what?" "A monster." Sarah stepped in front of Scylla. "The only monsters I see are the ones who would condemn an innocent being without trial. The ones who helped murder an entire species because they were different." "Careful words from someone in your position," the chief growled. "Step aside. We only want the prisoner." Instead of moving, Sarah smiled. "Scylla, remember how I said my ship was ready for a quick departure? I forgot to mention one detail." She pressed a button on her pad. The Phoenix's engines roared to life behind the security team, the backwash knocking them off their feet. The ship was running on automatic pilot, responding to Sarah's commands. "Now," Sarah shouted. Scylla created their brightest display yet, filling the entire docking bay with dazzling lights that seemed to ripple and dance. Under cover of the light show, Sarah and Scylla sprinted for the ship's open hatch. The security team's shots went wild, their targeting completely confused by the spectacular light display. By the time their vision cleared, Sarah was already in the pilot's seat, and Scylla had secured themselves in the cargo bay. "Hold on," Sarah called back as she punched in the emergency launch codes. "This is going to be a bit rough." The Phoenix shot out of the station like a bullet, leaving behind the chaos and darkness for the open stars. But Sarah knew this was just the beginning. They had the evidence. Now they just had to survive long enough to share it with the galaxy. "Where will we go?" Sheila asked, their lights reflecting off the ship's interior. "Somewhere they won't expect," Sarah replied, setting a course. "Sometimes the best place to hide is in plain sight." The Phoenix drifted silently through an ancient asteroid field. Sarah had shut down all non-essential systems to avoid detection, leaving only life support and minimal power running. Beside her, Scylla's crystalline form gave off just enough light to illuminate the cockpit. "Are you sure about these coordinates?" Sarah asked, checking her instruments again. They had followed a set of stellar patterns that Scylla had recognized, patterns that matched fragments of their species' oldest art pieces. "Yes." Scylla's lights pulsed softly. "This was once a place of great beauty, a gallery of our finest works." Sarah guided the ship deeper into the field. Suddenly, her sensors picked up something unusual, a large, smooth structure hidden among the asteroids. It was perfectly spherical, its surface covered in what looked like geometric patterns. "There," Scylla said, their voice filled with emotion. "The last gallery." Sarah carefully docked the Phoenix against the ancient structure. As they prepared to board, her pad picked up multiple pursuit signals at the edge of the system. "We don't have much time. The Council ships are catching up." They entered through an airlock that activated automatically at Scylla's presence. Inside, the gallery was vast and dark, waiting like a sleeping giant. As soon as Scylla entered, however, the entire structure came alive with light. Sarah gasped. The walls were covered in crystalline panels, each one containing what looked like frozen starlight. Scylla moved from panel to panel, their lights dimming in what Sarah recognized as sadness. "These are recordings," Sheila explained. "Each panel contains a masterpiece created by my people. Watch." Scylla touched one of the panels. Suddenly, the space around them transformed. Sarah found herself floating in what appeared to be the heart of a nebula. Streams of light and color danced around her in impossible patterns, telling a story of creation and growth. "This was my teacher's final work," Scylla said softly, before the purge began. Sarah moved through the gallery, her pad recording everything. "This is incredible, Scylla. This proves everything. Your species wasn't destroying stars, you were creating art with them." But as she scanned the facility, her pad picked up something else. Her expression darkened. "Scylla, there are explosive devices planted throughout the structure, old ones probably placed right after they killed my people," Sheila finished. "They wanted to ensure all trace of us would eventually disappear." Warning signals flashed on Sarah's pad. "The Council ships are entering the asteroid field. And these explosives, they're becoming unstable. The whole place could go at any time." Scylla moved to the center of the gallery. "Then we must save what we can. But Sarah, there may not be time for both the evidence and me. The ships will be here soon." Sarah looked at her pad, then at the beautiful recordings surrounding them. Everything they needed to prove Scylla's innocence was here, but if they stayed too long trying to download it all. "No," Sarah said firmly, pulling out a small device from her pocket. "We're not choosing. I didn't come this far to lose either the truth or my friend." "Friend?" Scylla's lights flickered in surprise. Sarah smiled as she worked quickly, connecting her device to the gallery systems. "Another human trait. We're stubborn about protecting the people we care about. Now help me set up a broadcast signal. If we can't save all the evidence, we'll show it to everyone at once." As they worked, the first explosions began at the outer edges of the gallery. The Council ships were getting closer, their signals growing stronger. But Sarah didn't stop. She had learned from Scylla that sometimes the most beautiful things happened right before everything seemed lost. "Ready?" she asked, her finger hovering over the broadcast button. Scylla's form glowed brightly. "Ready, my friend." Around them, the gallery's lights began to flicker as more explosions shook the structure. But Sarah was smiling. Sometimes, she thought, the truth was like light. No matter how dark things got, it found a way to shine through. Sarah's fingers flew across the control panel as another explosion rocked the ancient gallery. Around her, the beautiful crystal panels were beginning to crack, centuries of preserved artworks threatening to disappear forever. "Broadcasting now," she announced, activating every communication channel she could access. "Scylla, show them. Show everyone what your people really were." Scylla's crystalline form began to pulse with intense light. The gallery's remaining panels responded, each one activating in sequence. Through Sarah's broadcast, billions of beings across the galaxy watched in awe as the true history of Scylla's species unfolded. Stars danced in impossible patterns. Nebulae twisted into stories of creation. Solar flares wove together like threads in a cosmic tapestry. Each artwork was more beautiful than the last, showing clearly that these were not acts of destruction, but the highest form of artistic expression. "Attention, Commander Chen," the voice crackled over the radio. "This is Council Warship Destiny. Power down your transmitter and surrender immediately." Sarah checked her pad. The broadcast was reaching even further than she'd hoped. Social media networks across countless worlds were lighting up with reactions. The truth was spreading faster than anyone could stop it. "I have a better idea," Sarah replied to the warship. "Why don't you explain to everyone watching why your ancestors planted explosives in an art gallery? why they murdered an entire species of artists. She played her final card, broadcasting the military orders she discovered, the proof of the planned genocide. The reaction was immediate. Other channels began lighting up as ships from younger council species broke formation with the warships. "This is Captain Zena of the Arcturian Defense Force," a new voice announced. "We are moving to protect Commander Chen and the being known as Sela. This massacre must be acknowledged." More ships followed suit. The Vega Collective, the Sirius Alliance, even some Centaurian vessels crewed by younger officers who refused to be part of another cover-up. But the gallery was still falling apart. A massive section of ceiling crashed down nearby, barely missing them. "Sarah." Sela's lights pulsed urgently. "The reactor core is critical. The whole structure will explode soon." "Just a little longer," Sarah insisted, making sure every bit of data was transmitting. "They need to see it all." The main council warship launched a warning shot that rocked the gallery. "This is your final warning, Commander. That creature is too dangerous to live." Sarah looked at Sela, who was still broadcasting the beautiful artworks despite the chaos around them. Then she had an idea. "Sela, remember how we escaped the station? Think bigger. Show them exactly how dangerous you are." Sela understood immediately. Their form began to glow brighter and brighter, creating the largest light sculpture Sarah had ever seen. Through every video feed and holographic channel, the galaxy watched as Sela turned the entire asteroid field into a canvas. Light danced between the rocks, telling a story of peace and creation. The Council warships found their targeting systems confused by the display, while civilian ships broadcast the spectacle to every corner of known space. "Commander," the Council warship's captain sounded uncertain now. What is it doing?" "Creating art," Sarah replied simply. "That's all they ever did. And now everyone knows it." Her pad chimed with incoming messages. The Galactic Senate was convening an emergency session. Protests were breaking out on Council worlds, demanding justice for Xyla's people. Historians and artists were already calling it the most important discovery in generations. "Sarah." Xyla's voice was urgent. "The core is about to go critical." She nodded, already heading for their ship. "Then let's give them one last image to remember." As they boarded the Phoenix, Xyla created their grandest display yet, transforming the gallery's final explosion into a beautiful burst of light and color that would be remembered for generations. Sarah smiled as they escaped to safety, surrounded by friendly ships. Sometimes the best way to fight darkness wasn't with weapons or anger, but with beauty and truth. The Phoenix weaved through a storm of laser fire, its engines straining as Sarah pushed them to their limit. Behind them, a group of extremist warships had broken away from the main council fleet, determined to end Xyla's existence regardless of the truth. "More ships dropping out of hyperspace," Sarah announced, checking her sensors. On the main screen, she could see civilian vessels caught in the crossfire, refugees and merchants who hadn't evacuated the sector in time. "They will harm innocents to reach us." Xyla's lights pulsed with concern. Their crystalline form had grown slightly larger, reflecting the tension of the moment. Sarah's mind raced through options. The friendly ships from the younger council species were trying to help, but they were outnumbered by the extremists. The civilian ships were scattered and panicking. "Xyla," Sarah turned to her friend. "You once told me your species never built weapons because you had something better. Show me." Xyla's form brightened with understanding. "But it will take much energy. And they must be willing to trust us." Sarah opened a broadcast channel to all nearby ships. "This is Commander Chen. All civilian vessels, when you see the light show begin, follow the patterns exactly. Trust us. We're going to get you out of here." She then switched to a private channel with their allies. "Defensive formation around the civilian ships. Whatever happens, stay with them." The extremist ships were closing in, their weapons charging for a final barrage. Sarah held her breath as Xyla began to glow, their light growing until it filled the Phoenix's cockpit. Then it happened. Streams of light burst from Scylla's form, creating intricate patterns in space. The patterns formed paths, safe corridors through the battlefield, visible only to ships that knew how to read them. As laser fire crisscrossed space, the light patterns bent and shifted, showing exactly where and when to move to avoid being hit. "Amazing," Sarah whispered. "You're not just creating art, you're using it to guide them." Scylla's lights pulsed with effort as they maintained the complex pattern. "My people, we did not need weapons, because we could see the paths between stars." Sarah understood now. Scylla's species hadn't been planet killers, they had been guides, using their art to help others navigate the dangerous paths between stars safely. The civilian ships caught on quickly, following the beautiful light patterns through gaps in the enemy formation. The friendly warships provided cover, their own movements guided by Scylla's lights to maximize their defensive positions. But the extremists weren't giving up. Their leader's voice crackled over the comm. "This is just another trick. The monster must be destroyed." 3 warships broke through, heading straight for the Phoenix. Sarah prepared for evasive action, but Sheila had other ideas. The crystalline being created their most complex pattern yet, a web of light that caught and reflected the enemy's weapons fire, turning their own attacks into harmless but beautiful displays of color and energy. "Not tricks," Sheila broadcasted to everyone watching. "Art, life, protection. This is what we always were." The effect was immediate. More council ships began standing down as they watched Scylla use their powers not to destroy, but to protect every ship in the battle zone, even those trying to destroy them. Sarah smiled as she watched the enemy ship's attacks grow less certain, then stop altogether. Sometimes the best way to change minds wasn't through force, but through demonstration. "All ships are clear of the battle zone," she announced. "Not a single civilian casualty." Scylla's light shows slowly faded, though their forms still glowed with quiet pride. "Then we have shown them the truth twice now, once through history and once through action." Sarah nodded, already seeing messages flooding in from across the galaxy. Billions had watched Scylla save those ships, transforming a potential massacre into a dance of light and safety. "The Council will have to acknowledge this," she said. "You didn't just save these ships, you showed everyone what your people really were." "Teachers," Sheila agreed, their lights pulsing warmly. "Artists, guides through the dark spaces between stars." As they set course for the emergency council session that had been called, Sarah knew that the galaxy would never see Scylla's people the same way again. Sometimes the most powerful weapons weren't weapons at all, but the ability to create beauty even in the darkest moments. 2 months after the battle, Sarah stood at a new viewing window, watching students from a dozen different species gathering in the huge chamber below. The newly established Scylla Academy of Stellar Arts took up an entire space station, built specifically to honor and preserve the legacy of Scylla's people. "The next class is ready," she said, turning to where Scylla floated beside her. Her friend's crystalline form sparkled with excitement. "They are eager to learn," Scylla observed, their lights shifting in what Sarah now recognized as happiness. "Just as your people were eager to help build this place." Sarah smiled, remembering how quickly things had changed after the battle. The emergency council session had lasted 3 days, with representatives from every species watching the recorded evidence from the ancient gallery and the battle. In the end, even the oldest council members had to acknowledge the truth. First item on today's agenda. Sarah checked her pad, now bearing the emblem of Earth's first ambassador to the Academy. The memorial ceremony. They made their way to the station's central chamber, where thousands of beings had gathered. The huge space was dark, waiting. Sarah took her place at the podium, looking out at the assembled crowd. 3,000 years ago, a terrible mistake was made, she began. A species of artists was nearly wiped out because of fear and misunderstanding. Today we remember them, and we celebrate the survival of their last member, who showed us that beauty is stronger than fear. She stepped back, nodding to Xela. "Show them." Scylla rose into the center of the chamber, their form growing larger, brighter. Light began to stream from their crystalline body, filling the vast space with moving patterns of color and energy. The audience gasped as stars seemed to dance around them. Nebula formed and shifted, telling stories of creation and hope. Each pattern was more beautiful than the last, building into something bigger. "This piece," Xela's voice echoed through the chamber, "honors those who were lost. But it also celebrates those who choose to learn, to understand, to protect." The light show expanded, now visible through the station's massive windows. In space, hundreds of ships watched as Xela created their grandest work yet, a stellar light sculpture that spread across an entire sector. Sarah watched proudly as her friend transformed space itself into art. Her pad chimed with messages from across the galaxy as billions watched the live broadcast. But she was focused on the students below, seeing the wonder in their eyes. Young Centaurians watched side by side with Arcturians and humans, all thoughts of ancient fears forgotten. Some were already trying to create their own small light patterns, guided by the teaching programs Xela had helped design. And now, Xela announced, their lights pulsing with joy. "My new students will join me in adding to this piece." One by one, the students activated the special crystals they'd been given, tiny fragments grown from Xela's own form. Under Xela's guidance, their small light patterns joined the larger display, adding their own stories to the cosmic canvas. Sarah felt tears in her eyes as she watched. This was why humans explored space, she thought. Not just to find new things, but to learn from them, to grow, to help create something beautiful. "Thank you," Tilla said softly, floating down beside her as the combined light show continued above, "for being the one person who chose to defend me." Sarah smiled, watching as more ships arrived to view the display. "That's what humans do best, I think. We look past the surface, past the fear, and try to find the truth. And then you help others see it too," Sheila added, their lights twinkling. Together, they watched as the light show reached its peak, painting the stars with hope and beauty. The gallery of stars would remain, a permanent testament to what could happen when one person chose to defend the truth, and when fear gave way to understanding. In the end, Sarah thought, that was humanity's real strength, not just finding the truth, but helping it shine for everyone to see.